Hi friends, welcome to the new video. In this video, we will cover hire to retire process or hire to fire process, which is also called as a human resource or HR process in general. So as part of this particular video, we will cover what all are the steps in this particular cycle. And like the previous videos on procure to pay and on order to cash, in this video also, we will cover the basic features or basic process, which is useful for any professional for that matter who wants to understand how HR works, whether you are in HR, you plan to go into HR, or you want to audit HR. So this would be relevant, similar for procure to pay and order to cash also. So you can forward these videos, you can share these videos with your friends, with your colleagues, whom you think it would be relevant and they'll be able to think about these videos. And intentionally now I've started to make these videos in English so that people across the globe can access these videos and take something from these videos. Let's jump to the hire to retire process. What all are we going to cover in this video in hire to retire? So it is broken down into certain steps. First step would be, again, like I said, in every process, there is a governance. So policies and procedures, what is the governance, what is budget, planning. So that would be the first step. Then we will go to the requisition, employee requisition that we want to, if somebody wants to get a new employee, what all would happen there. From requisition, we will move on to identifying the talent, then interviewing, their documentation, then their background verification, if permissible under local law. After background verification, there would be employee record creation or employee master data creation in the company systems. Employees onboarded, then we'll move to payroll systems, their compensation and benefits, their annual appraisal, leave management, um, and statutory compliances at the time of uh, other engagement, learning and development at the time of retirement, their full and final settlement calculation at the time one person leaves the organization, what all steps are there at the time of separation, that we will cover in detail, feedback after their separation. So these all are the broad chunks which we will be covering in much more detail in this video. So let's start with the first element, which is employee, basically policies and procedures. What is the governance? So it needs to be clearly defined and documented that when what all would be the process, who all should take the interview, how many interviews should be there, what all budgetary approvals are required, who are required to approve those positions, if what would be the salary ranges, if there is a deviation beyond those ranges, then what would be the approval mechanism. uh, Conflict of interest should be clearly clarified to the employees. If I am hiring manager and if someone who's my relative is basically giving the interviews, then I should not engage in the hiring process at all, because then there would be a conflict of interest, right? So we don't want to give the impression that there is any biasness within the organization. So there are different policies and processes in place. So you need to see first whether those are there or not. And when we talk about budget, so there's a headcount budget prepared, which is in numbers, that this is the number of employees we want. It could be function wise, it could be country wise, and then the total number. And then with that population, there is a cost associated. So the budget is both in terms of numbers, headcounts, and in terms of the number of people, which are also called FTEs or full-time employees. So once that budget is there, there could be changes in headcount in two ways. Either it could be, I mean, whenever a new position opens, so the employee requisition, when it is open, it is approved by management. And once those approvals are there in place by management, by HR, by the hiring function. So once those approvals are in place, the recruitment team basically starts finding out the talent. Um, and when they find out talent, they have certain contracts with job boards like LinkedIn and such, and then there are placement consultants. So whomsoever shares the resume and finally whatever gets selected, they pay a portion of the CTC to that agency, and that is already negotiated in the contract. So while doing HR, it is also important to review contracts with these agencies, right? And the position could be in two forms. One form could be that the position is for filling a vacancy. Basically, some person was of an existing role was there, somebody was already there. In order to refill that role, since that person has left the organization, the hiring is done. Or the other case could be if somebody is looking to expand, or there's a specific skill set which the company wants to acquire or add to their company. In that case, a new hiring case can also be opened. So those approvals, once they are there and the candidates resumes are invited, and once they are received, firstly there is a screening done. and based on that screening, certain candidates are identified for interview. Now, it could be useful in your job search also how this process works. For screening, what happens, the hiring manager will list down that these all should be the we call it job description, or JD in short. So in that job description, it would detail what all would be the roles and responsibilities of that person, and also what all are the preferred qualifications and work experience which are required for that particular role. Now, it's not mandatory that unless you don't have it, you will not get the job. It acts as a guiding principle, and then with the recruitment team, hiring manager sits and defines the bare minimum parameters that if these criterias are there, then only show me the resume. Otherwise, I'm not interested in looking at the resume. So these criteria act as a filter. There is a software called ATS, which helps in filtering down resumes. Suppose there are thousands of resumes, so it's not possible for any individual to check one by one and select. So that software basically look for certain keywords which are there in your requirement and then search those in the resume. So it's important you have a ATS compliant resume if you're applying for a job. And once certain resumes are filtered down, those resumes are shared with the hiring manager that these are the ones we've shortlisted. And now, would you like to invite someone from these for interview? Then the hiring manager would select a few. Those people are interviewed. And then interview should also be structured. How it could be made structured? The feedback could be made structured. Certain questions and what was the response against it, or what was the feedback from the interviewer, could be made structured and could be documented. And ideally, it is preferred that the decision to hire someone should not be one person's decision. Why? Because we want to avoid the cases wherein let's say if I am the hiring manager, if I'm hiring everyone whom I know or who's a relative of mine or a friend of mine, then it's a big concern, right? Irrespective of their qualification. So what should happen is a second person at least should take the interview to understand whether the person we are hiring is a fit for the company, fit for the role or not. HR also takes an interview at times to see the cultural fit, and based on different other parameters, multiple other people can also take the interviews. Once a candidate is finalized, based within that salary range, the recruiter offers a salary, and once negotiation is done, a salary is fixed, a offer letter is released to the employees. Now, in certain companies and in certain countries, what happens, you cannot actually issue offer letter directly. What you would do, you would ask the candidate to fill in certain basic details. Those details are vetted by a third party. And then once there's a confirmation that whatever details have been submitted are actually correct, based on that, the offer letter is released. At times, offer letter is released, but it is conditional that in case there is a difference between what you have communicated to us versus what's there actually, when we will do the background verification, if there's a disconnect, then uh, we can revoke the offer letter. Once the employee accepts the offer letter, then there's a notice period which is going on with the other employer. There are talks if we want to buy out the notice period, and then it could be followed up with reimbursement and so on and so forth. And when the employee joins the organization, there is a certain set of documentation. There are banking related information based on which the salary or other compensation would get credited to the employee, and other stuff like their educational qualification, supporting documentation for their prior work experience. All those are stored, and then background verification is run wherever, in whichever country it is legally allowed. In certain countries, it's not legally allowed to perform some type of background verification because of the privacy laws and certain other aspects. Now, once everything is done and dusted, the background verification report can have a RAG rating. I mean, it generally has a RAG rating, red, amber, green. Red means there are serious red flags or discrepancies between what was communicated versus what was the actual scenario. So in those cases, wherever we see a red report, justifications are asked from employee. At times, employees asked to leave. In case of amber also, and if it is green, then there's no other step to follow. Once the employee is onboarded, their ID is created. At this step, also, we need to make sure that whichever employee is added to the employee master, there is a maker checker or segregation of duty process. Person who is finally paying or preparing the payroll should not be responsible for updating the bank account of employees, so that nobody can put their own account or any other account number or details, banking information, and get the salary credited in another bank account. Or there could be cases of dummy employees. So dummy employees who are not actually working or not there at all but still getting compensation, is a big risk, fraud risk in the company. So those factors or controls should be always looked for, which can help us avoid dummy employees, right? So once all the statutory compliances are done, the social security accounts are created, then what happens after a month, the salary or payroll process will start. In payroll process, um, the leaves, whatever employee leaves have been taken, based on those leaves, the revised compensation number of working days would be calculated, and the paid leaves would also be considered in that calculation. So leave management is another topic altogether, in which you need to see whether whatever leaves employee has taken, he has recorded correctly, the leaves are getting accrued properly, there is a provision, the financial amount or impact which would incur in case the employee leaves today or at the end of the year. So that provision is also booked in financial books, so that there is a matching principle going on, and there's no such expense which is unaccounted for. And for payroll calculation, certain other compensations, allowances, perquisites, whichever are there as per the employment contract. If employee is getting benefits like company car, so including the tax impact of all these aspects, the final payroll figure or pay slip is generated for individual employee. And total file is created with gross pay, deductions, and net pay employee wise. And then there are controls in payroll. One control would be variance analysis. What is the difference between this month's salary and last month's salary? And then we compare that, okay, this is the difference and what all are the reasons for this difference, right? Second would be checking from the master data, at least the data which is flowing, what were the, I mean, as an auditor, you can check that for certain employees, what was the compensation mentioned in the employment contract versus what is there in the employee master data versus what's there in the payroll file, so that you can match end to end. And then what happens, once the payroll file is finalized or approved, it is sent to bank, so that banking file and payroll file should match as it is. Whatever is the net pay in banking in payroll file should match with the net pay in the banking file. So you reconcile those two figures, and then try and find the analysis variances. You also need to make sure that there is controls in place there are controls in place to ensure that nobody can actually modify the amounts or the account number in those files. So those should be access controlled. Ideally, what happens in mature setups in SAP, Oracle, etc., the data directly flows to the banking portal. So there is no manual intervention, and hence not the risk of manually changing the bank account details gets eliminated. Then the final number which is posted basically as a payout in the after the payment is done. So reconciliation between what we calculated versus what is sent to bank, what is versus what is actually paid by a bank. Once this is done, then you can ensure that at least my payroll process has been moving smoothly. In payroll, what you will also try and analyze, as an auditor, you can do a variance analysis in terms of fixed component. If for a particular person, the fixed component is changing once a year, it is understandable because that person might be receiving um, the appraisal, right? And in certain part in a particular month, the bonus might have been paid out of the 13th salary, you call it. So that might be going out. So for those cases, it is okay. And then maybe different reasons you will find why those variances are there. And then if there is an abnormal variance without these reasons in a particular month, then you select those employees and ask why the fixed salary for this person has increased. If you want to see approvals for increase or decrease in fixed salary, that would make your analysis much more meaningful. Then for the variable component, you would try and find if there is a particular person who is getting overtime more than others, if there's a particular person who is getting shift allowance more than others, or any other allowance or perquisite, then you'll try and understand why this is so. Or you'll also try and understand a particular compensation, whether it is part of employment contract or company policy or something which is done by the employee or their manager on their own. So this will help you analyze and understand the payroll data better. You can even use Power BI to perform these type of analytics and visualize the data and see where all you need to focus, and select those particular months or those particular employees to take samples and identify and go through those items. Then there is appraisal. So you need to see how the bonus amount is calculated, how it is ensured that it is fair for all, and there is no biasness involved, how objective is the evaluation criteria, whether the goals were could be numerically specified and what was the numerical output against it, and then whether it is matching with the amount which is being paid to the employee. There is a bell curve normalization also, in which you would find that tails, basically bell curve normalization would say that 90% of employees would fall in the average category, right? And then remaining 10% would be the standouts, either on the bad side or on the good side. And those excellent or poor employees would get the compensation accordingly, or performance improvement program accordingly. And you need to understand all those aspects, how that is governed. Then there is an element of statutory compliances, whether the social security amount was calculated correctly. In India we call it provident fund, or insurance, ESI, whether that was calculated correctly, what all returns are required to be filed with authorities, whether that was done on timely basis, whether amount was paid on timely basis, any statutory dues like overtime, etc., which is required as per different Factories Act, or different other statutes, whether that was done on a timely basis or not. You cannot actually check all these things on your own in certain cases if the company size is big. Then what you would ask the client is, how do you make sure that you are adhering to all these compliances? So normally they would have a tracker. It could be an MS Excel based tracker, or basically a spreadsheet, or it could also be a tool wherein you track the due dates for all the compliances. Then somebody would upload the evidence that this compliance has been completed, and then somebody would review it. So based on that, dashboards could be created, and then you can follow up whether it is meeting the requirements or not. So that's about the statutory compliances. And but of course withholding tax, which is under direct tax, that element, the compensation, its calculation, and whether we are obtaining the evidences from employee for the declarations, tax declarations that they have made, all that will also fall under this category. Then what can happen? Employee can basically leave the organization, right? That is called exit management or separation. In case of separation, what would happen? Employee would put in their resignation over email or in some tool to their hiring manager, reporting manager or line manager. That person will either accept or reject. Then there is the most critical element in exit process is exit checklist, which is basically employee reaching out, or different departments reaching out to employee to make sure that the compliances or the requirements related to their areas are met. For example, finance will make sure that if any advance is paid to employee, that should be recovered. If any asset has been given to employee, that should be recovered. IT will ensure all the access that employee has been revoked. Also, there is business continuity needs to be kept in mind. So you would try and ensure that whatever access a person has, then the rights would be passed on to the next person. If someone is a cost center manager, that responsibility would get passed on. If someone has authority to approve bank payments, for example, so power of attorney would get modified and another person would get that access, right? So all these aspects needs to be considered very carefully, and hence this needs to be put in a structured manner. IT needs to make sure that employee has returned IT assets specifically, laptops, there is no confidential data going outside the company. All those aspects need to be taken care. Every department need to give a confirmation that yes, we are satisfied, there is nothing left from the employee. And then a full and final settlement is prepared based on all the retiral components like gratuity, um, and all, and their leave encashment, whatever paid leaves, unused paid leaves balances there, what would be the cash amount for that. All that is computed. A full and final settlement is shared with employee. So normally exit checklist is required to be completed by employee and approved by everyone before they leave. And once it is completed, approved, and employee has left, then full and final settlement is shared with them. Once they give acceptance, then finally the amount is paid to them. So there could be a high lead time or less lead time, so that needs to be taken care of. Some employee leave early, so notice period, whether if the employment contract with employee says that there would be a recovery in case short service of notice period, so it needs to be seen whether that recovery has been done or not. If there is a particular compensation, like if relocation has been paid, and the clause was if you relocate within 1 year, then half of it needs to be paid back. Or if there is a company leased vehicle, if company car is there, so what is the amount which company need to get to from the employee to let him take the car, or whether the car has been taken back into position or not. All these aspects are considered carefully through this exit checklist, and it is a good way for you to ensure whether everything was covered. And if something is missing, then you can also suggest if it can be added to exit checklist to ensure better level of controls. And then a feedback is taken, sometimes just before employee leaving the organization, and sometimes company after leaving the organization as well, to understand what all disconnects were there. Analysis of uh, very frequent root cause is done, and then management can devise action plan how to avoid and how to reduce attrition. Attrition is basically people leaving the organization. So you don't want that churn to be very quick. If every employee is leaving you, if one employee on an average is leaving you in every 2 years, 3 years, then a lot of time and energy and resources are spent on learning and development of those resources. So we would want to increase that time span and retain the employees as much as possible. And then this is where all these processes comes in handy, and this feedback comes in handy, right? But like we are doing in the series, let's do one thing. You can put your question, your queries, and then in the second part of the video we will cover basically all your queries, and also I will discuss in detail what all observations I have found out in the last 8.5 years in this payroll process. There are many interesting ones also related to contractual labor also. So contractual labor also we will cover in detail in that video, and we will also cover your questions, and we'll try and keep it engaging so that you can participate and you can get your queries addressed. So you can join that community. It is for audit professionals, and there you can access even more content. And also I'll make sure that every week there would be an exclusive access. We can chat in a group. Maybe I can organize a Zoom meeting and we can chat in a group once you are part of that community to discuss your queries and to resolve those. I hope you found this video useful, and if you want to see more such content, please stay tuned, and looking forward to your comments and queries. See you all. Bye bye.